The hungering glass Alara had always felt the world was wrong, not just unsettling, but fundamentally broken, as if reality itself was a thin veneer stretched over something far more ancient and ravenous. Her dreams were not dreams at all, but invasions, visions of endless corridors where the walls bled black ichor, of faces pressed against invisible barriers screaming soundlessly, of a name that slithered through her subconscious like a living thing: Isabel. The waking world offered no refuge, for, even in daylight, she caught movement in peripheral vision shadows that lingered too. Long after passing light sources, reflections that blinked when she didn't, and always, that sensation of being studied by something that breathed just beyond the boundaries of perception. The antique shop manifested on the coldest day of the year, its crooked doorway appearing between two derelict buildings where no entrance had existed before. The peeling letters above its threshold spelling echoes in what might have been dried blood rather than paint. Inside, the air hung thick with the cloying sweetness of decaying, not just rotting wood and moldering paper, but the unmistakable copper tang of old blood and something far worse, something that made her saliva thicken with primal revulsion. The shopkeeper emerged from the gloom like a corpse rising from peat. His elongated fingers steepled before a face lost in shadow save for his eyes' twin voids that seemed to swallow the flickering candlelight whole. She barely registered the other artifacts crowding the shelves, the teeth-filled music box softly chiming a lullaby in known scale, the taxidermy raven whose glass eyes tracked her movement, for her attention was irrevocably drawn to the monstrosity dominating the back wall. The mirror's frame appeared carved from petrified bone rather than wood, its intricate whorls and patterns, resolving into screaming faces when stared at too long, while its surface wasn't glass at all, but a swirling, mercurial void that reflected the room behind her, except the reflections were subtly wrong the angles. It's impossible her own image sometimes replaced by a gaunt, hollow-cheeked woman with stitched-shut lips who mouthed words Ilara's mind refused to comprehend. "That one hungers," the shopkeeper rasped, his breath smelling of open graves, his words slithering into her ears like physical things. "It doesn't show what is or was, it shows what wants to be." When she touched the frame, the bone pulsed beneath her fingers with a slow, rhythmic throb, and in that moment, she understood with terrifying clarity that she was unchoosing the mirror. It had already chosen her, had been calling to her through her nightmares, through the cracks in reality she alone could see. The first night in her cavernous loft, a space that had always felt unsettlingly transitional, as if the walls might dissolve to reveal some terrible truth, passed without incident if one ignored the way her reflection sometimes lingered in the mirror's depths after she de-stepped away, or how the temperature would plummet without warning her exhaled, breath frosting the air in plumes that briefly formed shapes resembling grasping hands. By the third night, the changes became undeniable. The scent of funeral lilies and burning hair permeated every room. No matter how many windows she opened, shadows pooled and congealed, like spilled ink even under direct light, and the whispers began, not from the mirror itself, but from the empty air around it, voices speaking in a guttural language that bypassed her ears to vibrate directly against her skull. They spoke of Blackwood Manor, of its halls that shifted when unobserved, of the thing that wore human skin, and called itself master of Isabel Lalo's Isabel, whose name sent jagged shards of ice down Ilara's spine. Research revealed Blackwood Manor's tragic history as sprawling Victorian estate consumed by fire a century prior, its wealthy owners and staff perishing in the blaze. Though the townsfolk spoke in hushed tones of how the screams had continued for hours after the flames should have silenced them, and how the firelight that night had cast shadows that moved independently of any physical form. The mirror's visions grew more insistent, dragging Ilara into Spell's final days with horrifying intimacy. She saw the beautiful, hollow-eyed woman sewing her own lips shut with black thread to stop the screams, saw the master of Blackwood Manor, whose smile revealed too many teeth, whose shadows stretched impossibly long no matter the light source, whose touch left frostbite bruises that never healed. Most terrible of all was the house itself, not a structure but a living entity, its walls pulsing with hidden veins, its floorboards parting like lips to swallow those who disobeyed, its grand ballroom where the chandeliers were fashioned from fused human bones. The whispers crescendoed into screams as the mirror revealed Isabel's final desperate act, the fire she set not to escape the master, but the house itself, for she realized too late that the manor was merely the outermost layer of something far older and hungrier, something that had been sleeping beneath the foundations, since long before the first stones were laid. The mirror's surface began to warp and bulge as if pushed from within. Its once pristine surface, now marred by hairline fractures that oozed a viscous black fluid smelling of gangrenous wounds. Alara's reflection no longer matched her movements sometimes. It stood perfectly still while she paced. Other times it continued moving after she'd frozen in terror. And worst of all were the moments when it wasn't her at all, but Isabel, her stitched lips straining against the threads as she mouthed the same phrase over and over. Asterisk. It's coming through. Asterisk. The final descent into madness began with the cracking sounds, not from the mirror, but from the walls themselves, as if the loft's physical structure was unraveling at the seams. The air grew thick with the stench of charred flesh and opened grave shadows, detached from their objects to slither across floors and walls with malignant purpose, and the temperature dropped so precipitously that Alara's breath came in ragged, visible gasps. When the first hand emerged from the mirror, skeletal fingers tipped with yellowed nails, its flesh hanging in rotten strips, Alara understood with dreadful clarity that the mirror was never a prison, but a conduit, and that the horrors of Blackwood Manor had merely been the beginning. The shopkeeper appeared in her doorway not as a man, but as a thing unraveling, his two wide grins splitting his face like a rotten fruit as he intoned, "You weren't the buyer, you were the sacrifice." The mirror exploded outward in a shower of jagged shards, each fragment reflecting not the room but some unspeakable elsewhere. And through the ruined frame poured Isabel's corpse. Her stitches burst, her mouth unhinged in a silent scream, followed by the others, the things that had been waiting behind the glass, their forms shifting and melting like wax, their voices a cacophony of anguish and hunger. The loft dissolved around her, the walls peeling back like burned skin to reveal the true Blackwood Manor, not burned, but alive. Its walls glistening with moisture, its windows staring like lidless eyes, its grand staircase descending not to a foyer, but into yawning, infinite darkness. The whispers in Alara's mind coalesced into a single, deafening truth. The mirror was just the beginning, the first thread pulled from reality's fragile tapestry. And now that the door had been opened, nothing could stop what came next. In the fragments of broken glass littering the floor, countless Alaras screamed soundlessly, while in the largest remaining shard, Isabel's reflection stood calmly, her lips no longer stitched, but curved into a smile of terrible welcome, her outstretched hand not a plea for help, but an invitation to step through into the waiting dark, into the embrace of the thing that had been hungry for so long.